The sequester takes effect and the sun still rose this morning. Who knew? I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, what happens if you have a freak out and nobody freaks out?
This is not going to be a apocalypse, I think, as some people have said. It's just dumb.
We should not have to move a third bill before the Senate gets off their ass and begins to do something.
Yeah, despite all the sky is falling rhetoric, the public does not seem panicked in the so-called sequestration spending cuts went into effect. The Pope abdicates, leaves the Vatican in a helicopter and becomes Pope Emeritus. You haven't heard that before, have you? The state Senate passes the mining bill. The Assembly is expected to go along when it votes this Thursday. Guido, the racing Italian sausage, was either stolen or went into witness protection. He's safely home, though. Sheriff David Clark says the county executive Chris Abele may be suffering from a bit of penis envy. Abele says he just wants a bigger horse like the sheriff. Michelle Obama makes a surprise appearance at the Oscars. It's good to be the queen, you know. Mayor Barrett gives his State of the City address, pushes the downtown trolley, and says he wants more of the suburbs money. The Government Accountability Board says it ignored the law that said it had to update voter rolls because following the law wasn't practical. MATC Board approves a new union contract that may violate Act 10. An Ozaukee County judge who signed a Walker recall petition faces a challenge in the April election. Now, Judge Thomas Wolfgren says now that he signed that recall petition because he wanted more time to study the issues, which he said he didn't understand. And finally, Celine Dion gets some competition from a goat.
Don't wanna be all by myself anymore.
Okay, I just thought you needed a break from all this. So let's start with Friday's big story. The John Doe ends not with a bang, but barely with a whimper. No charges against Governor Scott Walker or any of his top aides. After nearly 3 years, the probe nets a total of charges against 6 individuals and just 3 aides to Walker, former aide to Walker, when he was county executive. District Attorney John Chisholm says there will be no more charges. For much of the last 3 years, the Doe has been a cloud over Walker, and Democrats have gone to great lengths to exploit it. In his recall campaign against Walker, Mayor Tom Barrett essentially ran on questions surrounding the Doe investigation. The chairman of the state Democratic Party, Mike Tate, loudly predicted that Walker would see the inside of a jail cell. Liberal talk show host Ed Schultz predicted that Walker would be indicted within days, so not surprisingly, state Democrats reacted with disappointment to Walker's vindication. Joining me on our panel this morning, political strategist Linda Bruin, former Republican State Representative Michelle Litchens, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, and Media Tracker's Brian Sickma. Okay, Brian, let's start with you. Bottom line, is this decision a vindication of Scott Walker, or is that overstated?
It doesn't even begin to state what's taking place here, because for over 2 years now, 2.5 years in running, since this investigation became public, as the supposedly secret John Doe began to leak information, as reporters began to run with it, Democrats in Wisconsin used it to distract from the issues that Governor Walker was trying to tackle. They used it to try to smear him in a recall election, and what we found at Media Trackers and what others began to see was that throughout this process, it was a politically motivated investigation that was charged with ethics questions surrounding the ethics and the partisan backgrounds of the individuals conducting it. And so I think that the decision on Friday was a vindication in many ways.
If it was politically driven, then why didn't they bring charges against Governor Walker?
I think they understood that it would be very difficult to bring charges. After you have the chief investigator having a recall Walker yard sign in his yard, after 43 attorneys in the DA's office signed petitions to remove the governor from office, it would look like a DPW stunt.
Okay, so in answer to the question, who is John Doe? Apparently nobody. So what do you make of this after 3 years?
Well, I think what I make of it is that the bottom line is the hopes of some Democrats that this would just go and end up with Walker in prison.
Right.
That was really overinflated and hyperbole. I do think, though, that some pieces of this were serious, but at a much lower level. There was top Walker aides campaigning on county time. But that's been dealt with. And the bottom line is there wasn't enough proof, tangible proof, to charge anything else. So hopefully this will die down and we'll move on.
Michelle,
well, and not only that, I think we always have to remember that Scott Walker asked for this probe in the first place. And yet we still have these Democrats out there screaming, you know, as of when we found out that this was over with, they're out there screaming, there's really more, there's really more. And I think we have to make sure that those documents are no longer secret. They're not sealed, because we need to find out exactly what they were doing with our taxpayer dollars for the last 2.5, 3 years.
Okay, Michael.
Well, it was successful from the standpoint that, of according to some estimates, you know, the governor had to spend $500,000 defending himself against charges that never even came about. But
so
then, you know,
what is your definition of success then? That we wasted money on lawyers?
Well, they wanted to deflect issues back to this. But, you know, maybe there needs to be another John Doe investigation to find out how this information leaked out in a secret probe. Somebody might have did something criminal in terms of leaking out all this information.
Well, I think there's two things. I mean, number one, the Doe is supposed to be secret to protect the reputations of people who might be involved in it. So number one, you had a number of leaks. You had the media that reported a lot of people's names who turned out not to have done anything wrong whatsoever. And then, of course, you had the DA's office itself dumping all of this unrelated information during the sentencing of Kelly Reinfleisch, who was one of the aides who was convicted, dumping it out there. Apparently, now in retrospect, it looks like they decided to, since they couldn't prove the case, they weren't going to bring the case, they were going to try this case on the front pages of the newspaper. So I think there are still legitimate questions about the way this John Doe was conducted and whether or not it was the expenditure of taxpayer money was justified. And you know, as of now, I don't know personally how much money was wasted on this.
That's part of the question I have, and I don't feel, unlike Michelle, I don't feel like I need to see all the documents because I really want to respect the John Doe piece of this, regardless if it's a Republican or Democratic situation. But I think we should have an accounting of how much money was spent. It also will tell us how hard they went at this. Was this a $50,000 expenditure or a $500,000?
Think about it. I mean, Scott Walker must be the cleanest guy in America because how many people could have 3 years of basically uncontrolled, I mean, an investigation, you have access to cell phones, computers, and everything, and they couldn't find anything against him? Yeah. Now, what has your glass half full and what has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Lynn, you go first.
Well, my glass is half full because there are taxpayer cuts, tax cuts in Governor Walker's budget for 2013 and on, but it's half empty because as usual, the tax cuts favor those most wealthy. Anyone making $300,000 a year will get a $300 tax cut. But if you make $20,000 a year, you get $10 off.
Maybe that's because those people pay more taxes in the beginning. Michelle?
Well, my glass is half full because we've received a lot of precipitation in Wisconsin lately, and we had a drought problem last year, but my glass is half empty because I am just tired of the snow.
Okay, Michael.
It's half full because although the Walker administration came up with a new plan to invest $15 million in the job training, there are opponents who say it doesn't go far enough. Well, of course, it's half full because we didn't have $15 million in job training funds last week.
Okay, Brian Sickman.
Well, on Friday marked the one-year anniversary of the death of Andrew Breitbart, a conservative new media pioneer. So in that respect, the glass is half empty. But the good news is, here in Wisconsin, with Right Wisconsin, the MacGyver Institute, and Media Trackers, the legacy of the conservative new media is continuing and is now stronger than ever before.
That's true. Well, my glass is half full because Governor Walker is finally vindicated after all these years. It's half empty because where does he go to get his reputation back? Where does he go get an apology from his critics and from the media? Next on Sunday Insight, the fight over guns and gun rights. Is this town big enough for Police Chief Ed Flynn and Sheriff David Clark? Milwaukee's two top cops have become national figures in the debate over gun control. Sheriff David Clark Jr. strongly advocating for gun rights, and he's been a frequent guest on national shows. And last week, it was Police Chief Ed Flynn's turn in the national spotlight.
In the real world, we absolutely do nothing to enforce the laws on the books. Now, let's talk.
Just for the record, from my point of view, Senator, the purpose of the background check.
How many cases have you made? How many cases?
It doesn't matter. It's a paper thing.
Well,
I want to stop 76. I want to finish the answer.
Well, no,
I want to stop 76,000 people from buying guns illegally. That's what a background check does. If you think we're going to do paperwork prosecutions, you're wrong.
Meanwhile, Sheriff Clark releases a second PSA on self-defense.
Are you prepared to handle a life or death threat? Wisconsin's Personal Protection Act now gives you the same advantage that I have. Now it's the crook who has to wonder what you might do. Can be a great equalizer, but you always have to think survival. Remember, it's you and me now.
Okay, Michael Holt, how do you sort this out? Who is winning this debate, and how does Milwaukee get to be the center of the gun debate again, huh?
Well, it's ebb and flow, and it was, a unique coincidence that Thursday, Milwaukee police arrested this guy who jumped out of a car on 27th and Atkinson with an assault rifle, just shooting randomly around, shot 2 people. And so from the standpoint of should we ban some of these assault weapons because we don't need 30 rounds to kill Bambi, he's right. On the other side, you have the sheriff, and he's talking about self-defense, and we are the first line of defense. and he's also right.
You did notice that the guy that pulled out the assault weapon, he was already convicted felon, so it was illegal for him to have any gun. So a ban on the assault weapon would
in that
not have
particular
affected
case.
him.
But there's a whole bunch of people who have those assault weapons.
But understand,
and it don't need
but they're not
it.
the ones committing crimes.
And somebody got it
Brian
legally.
Sigma.
No, I think that Chief Flynn went to Capitol Hill, and his arguments were straw man arguments and full of hyperbole. I mean, he goes out there and at one point tells the Journal Sentinel, you don't need more than 10 rounds to hit someone. Well, the FBI has actually done studies of law enforcement officers, trained officers, and said that they should actually use magazines that are greater than 10 rounds in size to make sure they deal with their target. Chief Flynn needs to look at what's going on here and say, this is about personal liberty, it's about personal responsibility, and that's something Sheriff Clark has made very clear throughout this debate, and Chief Flynn should not have a fear of personal freedom or personal responsibility.
Okay, Linda Bruin.
Well, I actually agree with Michael on this one. There's elements of truth in both of them. The bottom line is, in my opinion, is the sheriff has gone way off the deep end on one side, and Flynn now went to Washington, D.C. and basically, you know, kind of started going off the deep end on that as well. So I don't think Milwaukee's coming off really well. The bottom line is I agree philosophically more with Flynn than I do with the sheriff.
Yeah, here's the problem, is that he says that there's a slow motion mass murder taking place in the cities, but they're not taking place with guns that were purchased legally. They are not taking place with assault weapons. They are the shooting is taking place from people who are convicted felons. There are already laws on the books, and Sheriff Clark is trying to make the point, okay, what about the district attorney's office and the judiciary that is not enforcing the laws that are on the book? Why are these guys out on the street? Why are they not behind bars, Michelle?
And Sheriff Clark is actually the one that's out there saying, you need to take care of this problem today because we're not able to take care of it for you every day all the time, or get there immediately and take care of the problem. But you got Chief Flynn, I mean, he made comments saying that he instructs his troops to go out there and tackle people with firearms and ask questions later, which is a little bit scary. He's supposed to be the one enforcing the law, not the one deciding what law is enforceable and not.
Okay, now am I too cynical in suggesting that maybe that Chief Flynn is taking this very, very high-profile position in order to ingratiate himself with his boss, the mayor, who stood behind him during various controversies?
That may be the case, but you know, there's the old saw that whenever you're in danger, help is only minutes away, and the problem is those minutes can turn to be too long. So Flynn has to realize that.
Okay, now you may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway. Let's dish out some unsolicited advice. Linda Bruin.
Well, I have some biblical advice actually for the Bad River Band, who made the mistake of not completely fixing their own environmental pollution problems before raising legitimate environmental issues about the mining bill. Matthew 7:5 says, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly so you can take the speck out of your brother's eye.
Well done. Michelle.
CPAC. Remember Ronald Reagan and what he said, someone who votes with you 80% of the time is your friend. So please invite Governor Chris Christie to CPAC.
Okay, Michael Holt.
Well, I've been waiting for gas prices to go down. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. So my advice to you is pay cash. It'll be 5 cents per gallon cheaper.
Brian Sigma.
Well, on Friday, we had Graham Zielinski go out and say that he was convinced Governor Scott Walker should be in jail. Well, if Graham Zielinski has any evidence, he can walk right down to the 4th floor of the county government building and present that evidence to the DA's office. If he has no evidence, he should just shut up.
My advice, unsolicited advice, would be to the President of the United States. Hey, how about governing for a change as opposed to constantly campaigning and trying to scare the bejabbers out of the American people? It might be kind of refreshing. Well, the board that runs Wisconsin elections defies a state law. Did they have any good reason to do it? Should there be an investigation? And why you should care. That's all coming up next. Well, under state law, the State Government Accountability Board is required to update the statewide poll list within 45 days of last November's election to eliminate invalid registrations. But last week, board officials admitted to WriteWisconsin.com that they had ignored the law and failed to purge the registrations off the statewide poll list in time for the April 2nd spring election. An official said that compliance wasn't practical. Now, that led to calls for an investigation and audit. Assembly Speaker Robin Vos said the GAB is undermining the integrity of our election process. GAB officials are intentionally ignoring a state statute, and it must stop. State Representative Jim Ott and a state senator asked Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen to investigate the board's failure to follow state law. So should we care about this? Michelle Litchens, you're a former lawmaker.
Right. This is a big deal. I think we have to look back, first of all, when they passed this law, no one was really instructed to send out these postcards, so GAB sent every clerk in the state something saying, we'll take care of this for you, right? Well, now they are blatantly disregarding the law because they just don't feel they can comply. And I think this is actually a national epidemic if you look at it. We have the president passing an extreme number of executive orders. We have members of the Senate, U.S. Senate, who decided not to pass a budget because they just don't feel like it. Now we have state agencies that are not following the law, and if we don't actually start to do something to address this, we're not going to function as a country of anarchy.
Yeah, well, I guess the question is, so do we get to not follow laws if we don't find them practical? Have you ever tried that as an excuse, Michael Holt? You know, April 15th rolls around, you say, hey, I was going to file my taxes, but it just wasn't practical.
Yeah, I've done that on a number of occasions, but you have a penalty to pay, and that's the problem. What is the penalty if this state government agency, and aren't the members of this GAB former judges?
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm saying in essence that they're above the law. They don't have to uphold the law, and then it's gonna have a snowball effect.
Okay, Brian Sickman.
No, we've seen this happen throughout Wisconsin, and every time it happens, whether it's the GAB, whether it's the receiving clerk's office who decided to violate the state law when it came to how you register voters, it's a problem because people need to know that state law will be followed. We're dealing with elections here. Elections have consequences. Elections are how the public expresses their part in our representative democracy. And if the GAB is above the law, they need to go get a judge to tell them they can't comply with this. They shouldn't be going out and making up laws on their own.
They are judges. That's the whole point.
But they didn't use the judicial system. But
Linda Bruin.
Well, it's called the Government Accountability Board. So I think that they might have an issue here. And first of all, I don't know how many times this has happened in the past, or if this is the first time it's ever happened. So that's a question I'd like answered. So, but if they actually are supposed to go out and identify people who are breaking election law, it's kind of hard for them to then turn around and say, well, we're not going to follow the law as well.
Part of it is also this arrogant idea that laws are for little people, not for us. That's on one level, but two, it's also this almost studied indifference to any concern that we ought to be concerned about invalid voting or voting fraud. And I understand this has become kind of the narrative of the media and the left that there's nothing to see here. We shouldn't be concerned about voter theft, but I would think that voter integrity ought to be a bipartisan issue, but I guess that makes me naive. Now, is what they said this week the same thing as what you heard? So let's go around the table. We'll start with you, Linda Bruin. What did they say and what did you hear?
Well, Governor Walker, quite rightly, by the way, said that he wanted the referendum on the Milwaukee County Board to be limited to one thing, what county supervisors should be paid. Great idea. What I heard, though, or what he didn't also say, was that he didn't like other provisions of the bill, namely the ones that would make the county executive in Milwaukee County one of the most powerful county executives in the state. And I don't think Walker likes that in a Democratic county.
Okay, Michelle Hitchens.
Well, the president said that he wanted to meet with Republicans to work on this sequester thing, but what I heard was I need a photo op and I really don't want to fix the fiscal mess.
Okay.
Well,
Michael
what the sheriff said was Chris Abey, the county executive, suffers from penis envy. What I heard was I'm not going to say, Charlie will tell you Monday morning on his radio show.
Okay, I will. Brian Sickman.
Well, what Senator John Erpenbach said was, we don't want actually to have new mine jobs in Wisconsin. What I heard him say was, I want everybody to be a bellhop like me at a Madison hotel.
Okay, now what I heard was the Milwaukee County DA's office saying the John Doe is closed. What I heard was we had a witch hunt, and guess what? We couldn't find any witches. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. And Linda Bruin, you're first.
We're winners because last week, on a truly bipartisan vote, Congress reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, which is credited for saving thousands of lives. It's a good day when Paul Ryan and Tammy Baldwin vote for the same bill. My loser is Jim Sensenbrenner. In 2000 and 2005, his press releases proudly announced his support. In 2012, he said this was the most important bill that has protected women for 18 years. But last week, there was no press release. Why? Sensenbrenner quietly voted against even the Republican version of the bill.
Michelle Hitchens.
My winner is Media Trackers. What a breath of fresh air. Real journalism in 2013. You guys investigated a story, found the facts, and exposed serious hypocrisy with the Bad River, or should I say Dirty Water Tribe, who carried a lot of weight with the mining bill opposition. Job well done. My loser is Tom Barrett. In the PPP poll for potential candidates to run against Governor Scott Walker, Barrett wasn't even one of the names polled. Ouch. Mayor Barrett, I guess you don't have a choice. You only get to fix Milwaukee.
Michael.
Actually, you stole mine. My winner is also Congress for passing the Violence Against Women's Act, and they actually expanded the bill to include new classifications. My losers, the black community. WMCS radio, talk show radio is off the air. In fact, they're playing Elvis Presley. That leaves a tremendous void in terms of information and education and an avenue or forum to debate.
Brian Sikma.
Well, my winner this week is Dennis Grzinski, one of the attorneys advising the Bad River Chippewa on how to fight the proposed iron mine. Grzinski led the Metropolitan Milwaukee Sewerage District at a time when it dumped 17 billion gallons of sewage into Lake Michigan. Not bad to go from water polluter to water champion. My loser is the Bad River Chippewa, who have repeatedly said that water pollution in northern Wisconsin would be genocide for their tribe. Never mind the fact that the tribe itself has repeatedly violated EPA and Clean Water Act regulations by releasing excessive amounts of E. coli, suspended solids, and phosphates into the Bad River. Kind of tough to be a clean water champion and a serial polluter at the same time.
Well, my winner, I think this one's obvious, is Governor Scott Walker. The witch hunt is finally over, and they could not find anything at all. Apologies to come, right? My loser, well, last Friday, the official spokesman of the state Democratic Party, Graham Zielinski, went on an unhinged rant comparing Scott Walker to mass murderer Jeffrey Dahmer. If Zielinski still has a job Monday morning, the state's Democrats will be huge losers. Thanks for joining us. Join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.